I'm Malcolm Douglas. I've been travelling around Australia now for over 20 years. My favourite area would have to be the far northwest region of Western Australia. It's probably the least known and the most rugged and the most inaccessible place to get into. And on this trip, we're going to launch a boat from Broome and head right up the coast.
Malcolm hopes to revisit many of the spectacular and isolated regions that he's seen during his long travels. He believes that in the future, much of the far northwest will attract many visitors, but today it's still inaccessible and explored only by the most adventurous. The journey begins at the old pearling port of Broome. North from Broome, few people ever go. For over 100 years, Broome's been one of Australia's most colourful towns, still famous for its pearls. It's also a large service centre for the many people travelling Australia. Most tourists stay for a few days, then head north for Darwin or south to Perth along the main highways. Without a boat and local knowledge, it's impossible to reach the truly remarkable coastline of the far north. For Malcolm, this wild country has a compelling attraction. Malcolm's 5-metre Quintrex will be home for the coming weeks. Huge fuel tanks give a range of 400 nautical miles. Sunup finds the men well north of Broome. For Andrew Malone, it's his first trip up the Kimberley coast. They're heading for the Lassipedes, low sandy islands, 20 nautical miles offshore. The Lassipedes are the main breeding grounds for the green turtles and many species of seabirds.
These rather interesting characters are if you don't mind, are the young frigate birds. They're often called man-of-war birds because when they're flying around in the sky, they dive bomb the smaller birds, like the sooty terns and all the various gannets and things are coming home, loaded up with food for the young, and these man-of-war birds just come out of the sky, dive bombing the other birds, causing total panic, making the smaller birds regurgitate their food, and then these ones just fly around and pick it up. They're very aggressive, very large wingspan and very fast. Okay. I might leave them now and just see what else we can find on this island.
The young defend their nests fiercely. Frigate birds, unable to walk or swim, spend most of their time soaring high on the thermals, ambushing other birds and forcing them to disgorge food. The chicks are fed as the parents fly low over the nests, dropping fish.
The Lassipedes are not only famous for their bird rookeries, but they're also the main breeding ground on the northwest coast for the large green turtle. These holes all over the beach, I'm in one now out of the wind, are like bunkers. The whole beach looks like a battlefield where been a war, but that's where tens of thousands of turtles year after year come up and dig these holes to lay their eggs. Tonight we're going to come back, walk quietly up the beach, and with luck we just may find a female laying eggs, and we're going to watch that, and that is very interesting.
During the day, turtles cruise the shallows, waiting for cover of darkness before they crawl up the beach. Malcolm finds a female getting ready to lay her eggs. With front flippers, she clears the fine, dry top sand, and when the hole's deep enough, excavates a smaller, deeper hole using her dexterous rear flippers. It's a physically exhausting task, and she rests frequently. Green turtles deposit over 100 eggs. Instinctively, she pushes and pats the sand to cover the eggs. After flicking more sand over the general area to disguise the nest, she struggles back to the sea. This arduous mission must be completed several times a year. So often, it's well after sunup before the egg-laying's done. Brown boobies are common and very inquisitive. Finding the boat stranded at low tide, they wheel overhead, inspecting the men. Against the vivid sky, they're fascinating subjects for the camera. And sunsets off the far west coast are breathtaking. About 150 nautical miles north from Broome, at the entrance to King Sound, the country changes dramatically from low sand dunes to a multitude of rocky islands. These outcrops are the beginning of what Malcolm believes is the most spectacular part of the Australian coast. Dangerous whirlpools, currents and eddies are whipped up as the huge tide surges out to sea with terrifying force. With each tide change, large numbers of fish are on the move, and the birds follow frantically, feeding on the fry pushed to the surface by larger predators. With the birds signalling the action, Malcolm never misses an opportunity to get a feed. On blustery days, King Sound is even more hazardous. The sea and the wind opposing forces, creating wild, treacherous waters that can flip a small boat without warning. North of the Sound, the coastline looms, awe-inspiring. Sheer rock walls, narrow waterways, and cliff-locked harbours make this place unique in Australia. Malcolm and Andy head for the tidal gorges of Talbot Bay, a spectacle that few people have ever seen. The waterways gradually decrease in size. The openings into the last two bays are very narrow. Entry can only be made safely on the tide change, when the waters, for just a few minutes, lie still. The last bay is almost landlocked. The entrance a mere 15 metres wide. Within minutes, the waters surge, the tidal push building rapidly into one of Australia's most remarkable wonders.
This is what we've travelled all the way from Broome to see. These are the amazing tidal gorges of Talbot Bay. We're in one of the most remote places of Australia. There's no way that you can get to this area without a boat. We're inside the second bay now. There's no way that we can get through there until the tide changes. I've been coming here for about 20 years. It sort of has a magnetic appeal for me because it's such an awe-inspiring place. Even as I'm talking, I can hear my voice echoing around. But you've got these sheer cliffs behind me, and you've got a very narrow gap where the tide rushes through day after day, week after week, year after year. I've got to be very careful, and I'm very nervous at the moment because if the boat moves over there, we have a very dangerous situation because we've got these giant whirlpools building up. At the moment, I'm in a back current. What is so incredible about this place is that every 5 minutes, the whole feeling of it changes as the tide builds up and comes running in. In about another 5 or 6 hours, it'll be full in this basin, and it will then turn round and go back out again. What we're going to do now is start the motor and see if we can work the boat up just a little bit closer so we can have a look up that very narrow entrance where the tide is rushing through. We can see now this amazing drop in water. Without a doubt, this is going to be one of the great natural tourist attractions of Australia. There's no way you can get in here without a boat. Probably in another 100 years you're going to have hovercraft coming up here from Derby or Broome. But at the moment, it's just pure wilderness area. It's absolutely amazing. Just really gets the adrenaline pumping through you. Just going over here to have another look at this. And just watching that whirlpool in front of me at the same time.
Malcolm believes that when this area becomes accessible to the round Australia traveller, this coastline should be protected with a national park classification.
It's the next morning now. We've come through before dawn. The tide is actually rushing out. You can get some idea of how much the tide rises and falls here when you look along this ledge here and see that black line up the top. That is actually the high water mark. It rises here around about 13 metres. But we're moving down into the water as it's rushing out. Going to try and hold the boat here so we can have a bit of a look at it. Very difficult. What I'm hoping to do this afternoon when the tide is running back in again is to climb right to the top of this gorge here and see if I can get some shots straight down into it.
At dead low tide, huge formations of brain coral are exposed. The weird abstract shapes surreal in the dazzling sunlight. Malcolm makes it to the top, where the panoramic views are unsurpassed.
Well, this is what it's all about up here. We've left the tidal gorge down here about 10 k's down, coming along nicely, and the next thing the tide just drops. Down it comes, around about 10 metres. I was motoring through here still in about 2 metres of water, and the next thing I touch the bottom, lift the prop, lift the motor up. The boat's stuck on the reef. In a matter of about 2 or 3 minutes, there's absolutely no water here. I'm a little bit concerned, a little bit worried because we hit the reef fairly hard. There was just no indication of what was going to happen. Fortunately, with these boats, we've got a pretty heavy aluminium keel here, and I had the motor trimmed up so far that I think that I've saved the prop. We won't really know until the tide comes in whether we can get off here. What I mean by that is whether we've got a hole in the boat.
Waiting anxiously for the incoming tide, Malcolm carefully checks the hull and outboard motor for damage. The tide trickles over the reef at an alarming rate. Within a minute or two, the Quintrex is afloat. Luckily, there's no problem with the boat or outboard, and the men head for Cone Bay to replenish their water reserves. And what a magic spot it is. Beneath this magnificent tree is a reliable supply of crystal clear water running out of the rocks. The cool shade is a welcome haven from the intense midday heat. Leftovers from lunch attract a motley army of hermit crabs. Arriving from all over the beach, they completely devour the remains of the fish within hours. "15 years ago, Malcolm lived for a time with the Bardi Aborigines, seafaring people from the Northwest Islands. Many of the old people are now dead, but their families have settled on the mainland at One Arm Point. Malcolm calls in to renew old friendships, and the children, like youngsters anywhere, show off. The Bardi are now a community of many races, the result of 100 years of contact with the pearlers. It's the mango season, and the children enjoy the fruit, even though it's still green and bitter. The Bardi have always lived on the rich bounty of the sea, and the children still learn many of the traditional skills. Their craft have changed, but the hunting technique is the same. The Bardi have always hunted turtle. It's their favourite food and their main source of fresh meat. Turtles are protected, and only the Aborigines are permitted to hunt them. At this time of the year, the females are full of eggs, a Bardi delicacy. The immature yolks are cooked in blood and relished. The rich fat left in the shell is roasted, and the youngsters soon polish it off. The next stop is Cockatoo Island, named for the raucous birds that inhabit the region. This is one of the few settled areas along the coast. The island is virtually a huge lump of iron ore. BHP have been mining it for over 30 years. The ore is the highest grade found anywhere in the world. The open cut is almost mined out, and within a year, operations will cease. The last of the suitable ores being stockpiled ready for shipment to the world's smelters. When this reserve's exhausted, the island will be abandoned. North of Cockatoo, the coastal waters are still uncharted. Hidden hazards abound and bigger boats steer clear of the area. Few people know that the northwest coast has many coral reefs. At low tide, the delicate shapes and colours are revealed. On one particular reef, an abundant supply of seaweed grows, food for the big marine turtles. The very old reptiles are attracted to the warm water flowing from the reef on the dropping tide. They nonchalantly laze about, unless panicked towards deeper water. The tide drops so quickly that the main reef seems to rise from the sea. The cascades spill over the edge until the rising tide covers the reef again. Turtles leaving their run too late endure a bumpy ride to the deeper channels. Those trapped high on the reef browse in the rock pools waiting for the next rising tide. Black-tipped reef sharks lurk in the shallows. Many strange creatures are exposed at low tide, like this small plant-like crab with its almost perfect camouflage. The pencil urchins, too, wait for the tide to run in. And when the tide does come in, it surges across the sand flats with unbelievable speed. Within hours, there'll be 10 metres of water here. Malcolm and Andy, their boat stuck fast since missing the previous high tide, have a few anxious moments. The rushing water scours the sand from the keel, and it looks as though the boat will roll over. Even Malcolm's dog, Jardy, senses the urgency of the situation. With the tide come the sharks. This large, curious hammerhead circles the boat. High on the reef, sleepy sharks wait for a feed. Malcolm hunts them away from the boat. When the tide peaks, pelagic fish school over the reef. Heavy lines make sure of a catch. Fish must be caught almost daily, and if you don't like eating fish, you go hungry. For sport, Andy tries a game rod and hooks something big. He's hoping for a large mackerel. But when it's only a shark, he's not too impressed. Jowdy hates sharks and crocodiles, sensing the threat in these dangerous creatures. And Andy has to grab her tail to stop her overbalancing. Removing a hook without getting bitten is never easy. With plenty of more palatable fish in the bag, Malcolm's eager to return this one to the water as soon as possible. There are more islands along the northwest coast than off any other part of Australia. Few people visit these remote, rocky outcrops, but for Malcolm, they're fascinating places to explore.
Of all the places that I've visited on this remote and wild northwest coast of Australia, this particular island would be the most mysterious, the most eerie, because this island is the island of the dead. These bones, these skeletons, belong to Aboriginal people. It always saddens me when I see these coffins along the coast. These are fairly recent ones. It saddens me because these strong Kimberley tribes have gone from this area. They were still here 30, 40 years ago. These two people would have died on the mainland. When the bones had dried out, they were gathered up by the people. During ceremonies, they were placed inside these bark containers, and they've travelled from island to island from the mainland and brought the bodies right back to their dreaming place. These particular people may have died hundreds of kilometres from here, but the members of the tribe would have carried these bones until they reached the mainland, or some 12, 15 nautical miles from where I am now. They used raft made out of mangroves, a special type of raft, and a basic paddle, and using the tides they would have island hopped all the way across till they finally brought these bones to their final resting place. Perhaps in a year or two, a big cyclone will come through here, bring up gigantic waves, pick up these skeletons and scatter them along the beach. Once these particular skeletons go, apart from a few cave paintings, there will be no more evidence on this coast of the vanished Aboriginal tribes.
It's a sad fact that many of the Aboriginal burial sites in the accessible parts of the mainland have been desecrated. To protect this site, Malcolm has deliberately withheld the name of the island. Along the beach, he makes a macabre discovery: charred human bones. They look burnt, but cremation was not a custom of the Kimberley Aborigines. Perhaps there's a more sinister reason for their condition. They might be Aboriginal, or European, or Indonesian. There's little that Malcolm can do but report the find to the appropriate authorities. This wild coast conceals many secrets. At the northern end of the island is a stone cairn, a marker erected in former times by the custodian of the bones to warn visitors that this island is an island of the dead. Without warning, a violent storm sweeps in from the mainland, a strange phenomenon for the time of the year. It's still the dry season. The rains are not due for 2 months, but the brilliant blue sky is obliterated by menacing black clouds. For Malcolm, who's not at all superstitious, this is the most eerie experience he's ever had. By morning, the storm has blown out, and the seas are again glassy calm. After several hours' run, the boat's dwarfed by Steep Island, dominating the entrance to Doubtful Bay. Malcolm heads for shore to check out a freshwater soak. This is typical of the coastline, stark, rugged and inhospitable. Even the gum trees are gnarled and misshapen, bonsai'd by the elements. Malcolm camped here once with the last of the old Aborigines, who showed him a watering place below a small jungle thicket. Between the rocks, a regular flow of fresh water is exposed for only a few hours at low tide. Jowdy's been travelling with Malcolm for 9 years, and she still hates swimming. From Doubtful Bay, it's a long journey up Walcott Inlet. As they swing into the Isdell, it looks like the mouth of any northern river, with its dirty water and mangrove-lined banks of mud. Hardly an impressive sight, but within a few kilometres the scenery changes dramatically and the river runs through a giant chasm of breathtaking beauty. To one side lies an even bigger chasm, with an abundant supply of fresh water. On the full tide, Andy tries his luck, for this is the home of the fighting barramundi. It's Andy's first try at barra fishing, and within minutes he's landed a whopper. Most fishermen only ever dream of catching a barramundi this big. As the tide recedes, the boat's left high and dry, and in the deep pool where Andy hooked his fish, there's now only thick, oozing mud. By late afternoon, the river is dry. Dinner is a real gourmet meal. All the fish is cooked, and any leftovers will be eaten the following day. During the night, on the high tide, the men start out for the top of the Walcott Inlet. They're now 60 kilometres from the open sea, and this far inland the water completely disappears on each low tide. Many uncomfortable hours are spent in the mud. For Malcolm, it's a frustrating hindrance. But for the mud skippers and crabs, it's home. Mud skippers are common along all the rivers. Their arm-like fins allow them to move about with surprising speed and agility, while their extended eyes give them all-round vision out of the water. It's believed that mud skippers can absorb oxygen directly through the skin. They disappear at the slightest hint of danger. One needs a keen sense of adventure to put up with these conditions. It's now late in October, the hottest time of the year, with the daily temperature in the 40s. Among the mangroves, Malcolm finds 2 baby crocodiles. He's currently developing a research centre in Broome to study the crocodile and has an intense interest in these ancient reptiles. These 2 are small saltwater crocs. Crocodiles are now protected, and it's exciting to see that they are breeding again after being shot almost to extinction in the 60s. These juveniles, only months old, could eventually grow to over 5 metres and might live for 100 years or more. Beyond the mangroves lie the billabongs, delightful sanctuaries after the muddy rivers. Malcolm, always conscious of staying healthy on these long trips, helps himself to some fresh food. The lily stems have a flavour like celery. The rising tide arrives with a rush. Within an hour, the landscape changes again. With the water high among the mangroves, Malcolm and Andy explore the mouth of the Charnley River, which flows from the Kimberley Ranges far inland. Along the way, a pathetic sight. With the extreme heat and poor feed at the end of the dry season, the wild cattle are very weak. Malcolm tries in vain to help. It's too exhausted to move, and the mud holds fast. It'll be food for the crocodiles during the night. The Charnley River, like the Isdell, runs through magnificent gorges. This far from the coast, the weather patterns are changing, and the first signs of the coming wet season are almost intolerable heat and threatening storms. Few places in Australia offer fishermen a better chance to get a feed. Barramundi, hooked on light gear, are superb fighters. Let's look at that amazing jump again. An unwelcome intruder is attracted to the commotion. Malcolm only just manages to get the remains of his fish from the water. Shark attack can be swift and unexpected. In the morning, another visitor, a large saltwater crocodile. Silently, it swims towards the boat. The killing of crocodiles for their skins was banned in 1970, and now the maturing reptiles have little fear of men. This one takes food readily. They're incredibly fast. A crocodile lifts its head high out of the water to swallow. Crocs this big are immensely powerful, and if given the chance, will readily attack humans. The size of the reptile can be clearly seen when it surfaces. Jardy, recognizing the threat, is very agitated. She'll not relax until the croc has moved on. Malcolm and Andy move further north along the Sale River. Apart from the wonderful scenery, the river has a unique feature. Just behind these large melaleucas is an area of jungle. Such luxuriant growth is fed by a constant flow of fresh, clear water. It's a magic place, cool and green after the heat of the rocks. This is such a vast territory that it often takes days to reach the next place of interest. The men head for the most northerly point of their travels, the mighty Prince Regent River. The wind springs up and conditions deteriorate. All day they punch through big seas and Malcolm's worried. They're using too much fuel, and in the heavy weather, he's unable to locate their next stop, Curie Bay. At sundown, they seek refuge in a sheltered bay. Fuel is low and they're in trouble. In the morning, the winds drop, but with little fuel remaining, it would be impossible to reach their destination. Malcolm and Andy prepare for a long wait. Andy arranges stones into a huge sign saying, "No fuel," which can be seen from the air. A bough shelter is protection from the sun. It might be home for quite a while. Malcolm sets up a distilling apparatus. In a sealed pot, salt water is boiled off into a tube, where the steam condenses and dribbles into a cup. It's a slow process, but effective. They're in luck. They signal for assistance. It's coastal surveillance who patrol between Broome and Darwin, searching for drug smugglers. A trawler is notified of their position and within hours arrives. Jack Drynan, the skipper, is heading south to Perth after a season of prawning. He's able to tow Malcolm's boat to a point where Curie Bay can be reached easily. The cultured pearl farm at Curie Bay is possibly the most isolated settlement in Australia. Malcolm's fuel from Broome has been delivered months earlier. The large tanks hold a total of 600 litres. And so at last, the Prince Regent River. The Prince Regent flows through a vast region of unspoiled wilderness. They swing from the main river towards their final goal, the magnificent King's Cascades. Malcolm's always wanted to come back here after seeing these waterfalls in 1971 when he was sailing on a pearling lugger. What an inviting place. The clear waters and lush vegetation contrasting vividly with the surrounding harsh sandstone plateau. There are few places so appealing on a hot day. Jardy's not too happy about having a cold shower. Malcolm and Andy climb the terraced rock face, hoping to locate the source of this endless flow. But the enervating heat slows them down. The country north of the Cascades is even more impressive. Kilometres of massive buses line the river far into the Kimberley. Even today, there are places up in the headwaters that no European has ever seen. It's an area that before too many years have passed, Malcolm hopes to explore. But now it's time to south, back to Broome. This coast is no place for a small boat with the cyclone season about to begin. Malcolm hopes that in the future, this vast wilderness will be recognised as one of the great natural wonders of Australia, and that it will be protected for all time.